You can occupy yourself seeing what all of my folders are. Like, oh, Dev plays Stardew Valley. What's GT2? It's Gran Turismo 2, just so you know. Initial D OSTs. Dev really likes Initial D. Yes, I do. In fact, I do. But let's talk about Magic. Let's talk about Magic, baby. Starting with some Dominaria United cards that we just got to see today. We finally got to see some Dominaria United cards. And some of them look good. Some of them are kind of, whatever. Starting with Jaya, Fiery Negotiator. This card could be good, but I'm going to go ahead and let you know I got my doubts, family. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 red for a 4 loyalty planeswalker, Jaya, with 4 abilities, typically pretty good. +1, create a 1/1 red monk creature token with prowess. -1, exile the top 2 cards of your library. Choose one of them. You may play that card this turn. -2, choose target creature an opponent controls. Whenever you attack this turn, Jaya, Fiery Negotiator, deals damage equal to the number of attacking creatures to that creature. Or -8, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a red instant or sorcery spell, copy it twice. You may choose new targets for the copies. Now, I don't think you really need to look at the ultimate too much. I'm not sure how much you're going to ultimate this Jaya. I really just don't know. The ultimate is comparable to Rowan. The 3 mana planeswalker is comparable to her ultimate, which allows you to copy things. But with this, obviously, you don't have to pay mana. You get to copy things twice instead of once. So all that's good. But -8 it's a lot, cowboy. So what do we think of these first 3 abilities? Well, the +1, it kind of reminds me of Nahiri, the 4 mana Nahiri in this format that sees 0 play whatsoever. And it's the only plus ability on the card. I think 4 mana, play it. 5 loyalty planeswalker and a 1/1 prowess. At least it's protecting itself. You get a blocker. If you do get to untap with the 1/1 still in place, some cards in your hand that you might do some damage. You kind of have like a Monastery Swiftspear a little bit, just without the haste at that point. So I'm not saying the token's bad. I don't think the +1 is terrible, but I do think you want a little bit more impact on turn 4 in Standard than a 1/1. I compare this to like a Stensia Uprising. It's better than Stensia Uprising, but Stensia Uprising is a 4 mana enchantment that gives you a 1/1 every turn, right? And that card's not great. I like it, but it's not good, right? So I feel kind of the same way about the +1 here on Jaya. The -1, you probably can't do the turn she comes into play unless it's relatively late in the game. You got a bunch of mana. So I think you probably do this the second turn she's in play. And if you're able to block effectively for her, it takes her down back to 4 loyalty. So 4 loyalty planeswalker, all of your mana untapped, 2 looks. I think that's actually really good for like a big red deck or even a mono red aggro deck. Which we'll circle back around to in a second. But let's look at the -2. This is a removal ability. You can, basically pay 4 mana for a 2 loyalty planeswalker, attack that turn, and immediately kill something, Kabira takedown style, kind of, right? Just however many attackers you have, you get to shoot something for that much damage. And that probably kills something if you curved out correctly. And even if you only, got to keep 2 of the creatures you curved with and like something else got removed, you probably still kill a creature if you're able to attack and your opponent has creatures on board. So I think in a mono red aggro deck, that's probably where you want to play this card a lot of the time, right? It's at the very top of your curve in those mono red aggro decks. But is it worth it in that case? I will say the +1 synergizes with the -1. The +1 synergizes with the -1, and that's pretty good, right? Because you +1 at the first turn it's in play. Then you minus it, and you play, one of the 2 cards that you exile off the top of your library. And that'll help you, proc prowess on your guy, trigger prowess. So all that seems kind of okay. I like that this card, once it's on the table, kind of needs to be dealt with. I have made a bunch of, or at least conceptualized, a bunch of like Rakdos Planeswalker decks in the last couple of months, Teamer, Planeswalker decks, all kinds of weird Super Friends builds and stuff. And they're always missing a good red Planeswalker. And I think this might help fill some of those holes. But those are mostly in mid-range decks. And again, I'm not sure how great these modes are in the mid-range deck. I don't know how much you're attacking in the mid-range deck. If you are, though, if you're attacking with 2 guys, you can take out your opponent's X2 on turn 4. I actually think that's a really good swing in board position, right? I think that's not bad. You played a Planeswalker. You have a couple of guys attacking, and you get to kill a guy. However, let me say this, a little slightly complex, but I don't want to say that. It sounds pretentious. But The thing about the -2 removal mode is that it's not just point and click, right? Like, you want to play a Planeswalker on 4 and then protect it with creatures that are untapped and ready to block. So when you play this, you might want to use the -2 ability to take out a guy, right? But that means you have to attack with enough guys to kill that guy, and that's probably going to leave your Jaya naked. And the worst part of that is that, naked grandma. But still, you know, not only have you attacked with your guys and tapped your dudes down, but you also have a 2 loyalty Jaya. So all your opponent has to do is like not block with their one guy, and they probably get to swing into Jaya and kill her. So you just played like a 4 mana removal spell. Is it good on that mode? If you really need a removal spell, it's probably decent in that mode. But it has enough stretch. It's got 4 different abilities. You know, even the minus ability you can do twice before she dies naturally. That's all pretty good. If you can get in 2 attacks, like even if you have to say play Jaya on 4, swing with 3 guys, bolt their dude, right? And then next turn, untap, attack, untap -2 Jaya again, killing her, and then attack and kill opponent's other thing, then you've still 2 for 1, right? You paid 4 mana to kill 2 other guys over 2 turns, right? So that actually isn't too bad. And over long games, like in those mid-range decks I'm talking about, in those long games, she does give you a kind of card advantage that's like really, really important. But, you know, you can't, again, in that mid-range deck, say a teamer deck, you can't rip a negate off the top of your library and then save it for a rainy day, right? You got to play it that turn. So it has to be in a very specific sort of creature-oriented mid-range deck, the way the entire card is set up. But I think we have plenty of those in Standard. Just whether it's better than other 4-mana options in those decks, I'm not sure. Is this better than Helana and Elena in, say, a Gruul mid-range deck? You're going to play this over Helana and Elena? I don't know that you're going to do that. Meanwhile, in the aggro decks that it also looks like it kind of fits well into, is it better than Thundering Raiju is my problem. You know, how many 4-drops are you really going to play in your very streamlined, low on the curve aggro deck? Probably not going to play too many 4s, right? And I think that in that aggro deck, a mono red deck or whatever, Thundering Raiju probably beats this card out for the 4-drop slot. So I have my issues, not in terms of the card's playability in a vacuum, but its playability in the new Standard when you look at all the other cards that are available to play around it. I'm not sure how good it's going to be in these sort of Super Friends focused decks that can't take advantage of every mode on the card. They're really just looking for the -1, right? And even then, the deck has to be relatively creature or at least permanent oriented, you know? So I have doubts. But I do want to play with this card, right? A Planeswalker that gives you all the things you want from a Planeswalker. That should be said, right? A Planeswalker that gives you Creature Factory, that pluses, a plus Creature Factory. A card advantage tool for very little loyalty cost. And removal. Again, just everything you want from a Planeswalker. Creatures, card advantage, removal. So really cool. Typically 4 ability Planeswalkers are playable. But this is no like Chandra Torch of Defiance. You know, if you're comparing it to another 4-mana, you know, red Planeswalker that we've seen the last few years, I don't think this is anywhere close to like Chandra level in terms of playability. But I think it's a solid Planeswalker. I really do. I would probably rate it somewhere around like a 7.25, you know, 7.25, which can easily see Standard play. But again, ratings happen in a vacuum. And when given the context of Standard at whole, even a small Standard, a 5-set Standard, I'm not sure that Jaya is better than some of the things we already have access to. So we'll see. In terms of 4-mana Planeswalkers we have access to in Standard right now, this is a million times better than Zariel. Like, so much better than Zariel, but good enough to see play? You know, I don't know. I'm not too sure about it. So let's move on to our next card, and I'm not even sure what that is. Just what happens if I hit next? Oh, we get Llanowar Loamspeaker. We get Llanowar. Okay. Real talk. I think this is the best card spoiled today, just because it's so darn practical. It really is. Llanowar Loamspeaker is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 1/3 elf druid. You can tap Llanowar Loamspeaker to add a mana of any color, but you can also tap double L and have target land you control become a 3/3 elemental creature with haste until end of turn. It's still a land. Activate this ability only as a sorcery. This card looks pretty sexy, but again, just because of Practicality. You can tell I'm growing up because this kind of practicality is sexy to me. Looks like a good provider, all that. Still, this card does look very, very tasty. I've been saying that like Reclusive Taxidermist could be pretty decent in the next format, right? Because we just don't have a whole lot of options. In Sculptor of Winter leaves, Tangled Florahedron leaves. I was really hoping that we'd get a good 2-mana dork, and this is the best. Like, this is a perfect 2-mana dork. Sylvan Caryatid would have been slightly better. It's a 2-mana 0/3 with hexproof. Or Shroud? Maybe that's Shroud. You can't hit it. But either way, this is still good. This is out of Play with Fire range, which is great because when you're playing, take it from me, personal experience, anecdotal, but still, 100% of the time that you are playing Reclusive Taxidermist instead of this card, they will have Play with Fire. 102% of the time, they'll have it in their hand on turn 1. So you just can't play Taxidermist. This doesn't die to that card, and that is actually kind of a big freaking deal. So a mana of any color, 2 mana, 3 toughness, good by itself, and then you tack on the land ability, which is sick. I really like dorks that have some sort of relevance after they're no longer super relevant as a mana dork, you know? So after you've already played your Titan of Industry, or on turns where you can't play your Titan yet, right? Stuff like that. Where you're ramping to your Titan, but you're only at 6 mana, you can't cast anything this turn. Why not make a land a 3/3 if you can sneak in? I mean, there's plenty of ways. Plenty of reasons not to. Your opponent might have removal, they kill your land, now it's 2 turns before you get your Titan, and you feel terrible. So, you know, be careful. Don't swing into open mana or 4/4s, you know, don't be an idiot, but still the ability to tap and just make a 3/3 is great for your 2 mana investment, right? For 2 mana, you're kind of getting a 3/3, a little bit. And if your opponent kills your land, it's not all right. Sometimes people ask if you're fine. You have to say you're fine, but you're not really fine. It's not all right, Katy Perry. But they didn't kill your Loamspeaker, so they killed your land, but next turn you can still swing with another 3/3. Like, they had the Infernal Grasp for the first land. They're not going to have the Infernal Grasp for every land. They eventually have to grasp the Loamspeaker and just take a shot in the chops from a 3/3 land one turn. So I don't know. I think this is cool. I hate that it's rare. I really don't want dorks to be rare, dude. In this day and age, we have Arena. The card may have been rare without Arena. Cards like this have been rare before. Again, Sylvan Caryatid, that was a rare. I don't know that this necessarily had to be, but you're going to have to spend 4 wild cards on your dork, and that sucks in a world where, you know, Sculptor of Winter and Tangled Florahedron are the cards played in this slot. And we haven't had to use rare wild cards on them for like 2 years. But now we're going to have to, and that's kind of lame. But still, in paper, the card probably won't cost that much, to be honest. It'll be played, but it probably won't cost that much. These dorks hardly ever do. So just a really solid-looking card, and probably the best, not my favorite. We'll save that for later, but not my favorite, but probably just the best card of the day, all things considered. So I'm going to give this thing a 7.75. I think it's somewhere in that range, around an 8. Just a really solid, very solid Magic card that's going to show up in a few decks because, like, it's just going to be the best option for a 2-mana dork. And, like, are you not going to play a 2-mana dork in your ramp deck? Come on, you have to. So craft them up, baby. Sorry you have to, but it's really good. Oh, there it is. Yep, that's the card. I actually don't have too many cards from Dominaria United to talk about left in the video, but this one is my favorite. It's my favorite little card of the day. Flyerball. Flyerball, they call it. Shivan Devastator. Now, what this is a Dragon Hydra. Is that not the coolest, like, batch of creature types you've ever heard in your life? Dragon Hydra? Dragon Hydra. It's awesome. But anyway, Shivan Devastator is a red mana and X for a 0/0 Dragon Hydra with flying and haste that enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. This card is actually, I think, quite good. This card's good. Now, first of all, something I haven't, for some reason, seen anybody point out is that you can play this as a 1/1 flying haste for 2 mana. You probably shouldn't. You very likely shouldn't do that. But you can play this as a 2/2 flying haste for 3 mana. Again, probably shouldn't, but it's a curve filler. That's typically quite good, and there's going to be situations, even later on in the game, where you play like a 4-mana thing, but you have 7 mana. So like you play a 4-mana thing, and then you play a 2/2 Flying Haste Devastator. And that's kind of fine, because you got to double spell, you got to put 2 threats on the battlefield, you get to swing with this one the same turn and all that. Or maybe, right, you play your Devastator first, right, and get like a 5/5, 6/6 Flying Haste. They deal with that, that's fine. You still got a 4-drop in your hand, or vice versa, the other way around. So cards that scale in this way are typically better than they look, especially when they have haste. I think that this card could see some play. I do. In some ways it feels vanilla, right? It's just a blaze. It's a blaze with legs, which is strictly worse than blaze. But no, blaze doesn't get to attack twice, 3 or 4 times or whatever, you know. Blaze doesn't get to sit on the board, whereas this does. Blaze can't block, whereas this can. Blaze is a great top deck, but this is a much better play on turn 4 than Blaze is, right? A 3/3 Flying Haste. If you have nothing else to fill that part on the curve, you'll probably do that in your aggro deck. So, I don't know. But in the meantime, if the game goes longer than you want it to and you have 8 mana out, this is a 7/7 Flyer Haste. Rip it off the top, both in top deck mode. Opponent doesn't have removal. They have to draw removal or they lose the game to it. You know, if not that turn, the next turn. So, I don't know. I think there's something to it. You guys know that I'm a big fan of red X spells. I like fireballs, like a lot. I want them in my standard. And I think this is a really neat way to print a fireball into standard without actually printing fireball. You know, I mean, we already have like Light Up the Night, and that doesn't see much play. But again, Light Up the Night's not a body. Like, they have to deal with this turn after turn. I think that's good, even at Goldspan Dragon rate, right? It's strictly worse than Goldspan Dragon, but it's still a 5-mana 4/4 Flying Haste. At 5 mana, that's the literal same rate as Goldspan Dragon. At 6 mana, 5/5 Flyer, not bad. It's Inferno of the Star Mounts, which sees no play. But there have been, imagine, all of the games where you played a Goldspan Dragon on turn 4 or 5, and you swung with it a couple of times, and it died, right? Imagine if the next time you drew a Goldspan Dragon that game, or just imagine all the times you've had 2 Goldspan Dragons in your hand, right? And you play one, you swing with it, you get a treasure token, right? The next turn, you play a Goldspan Dragon, you swing with both of them, right? So imagine if all those times you could have, the second Goldspan you played could have been a 5/5 or a 6/6 because of the treasure you just generated, right? If you could have scaled up your Goldspan Dragon by paying 4 mana for it, imagine paying more mana for it. Imagine all of the times you would have done that in a game of Magic. And I think Shivan Devastator, again, has a real chance at seeing some standard play. I really do think that it does. This is an interesting card for like a big red deck. You know, like Big Red needs these, again, take it from someone who's been trying to make Big Red work for like 6 months now. Big Red needs more of these like top deckable, I win the game kind of options, because it just doesn't have as many as it's used to having. I know that sounds crazy in a format with Goldspan Dragon, but Big Red doesn't draw enough cards. Even in a format Reckoner Bankbuster and other things you can draw cards with and stuff like that are in that deck. The Red March I've been using, Reckless Impulse I've been using in Mono Red to draw cards and stuff. But there's still just not enough real card draw in Red. And because of that, you need to offset that. You need to balance that out with cards that are really, really good for the Big Red deck to top deck. And I think this is right up there. I think a one-of Shivan Devastator sounds perfectly reasonable in a lot of lists to me. Even mid-range decks that aren't completely mono red or whatever, right? Just like, a teamer list or something, I could definitely see a one-of Devastator. You draw it off the top, you win the game. So we have seen, mostly in green, right? In green, we've seen these creatures, and even in colorless, we've seen these creatures that you just pump X mana into, and they are an XX, whatever you paid X for, right? But this is probably the best one of all time. It probably is, because evasive ability plus haste is kind of unbelievable. The evasive ability alone is very good. Just throwing that out there, but giving it haste that's better than you might think that it is. That's quite good. Shivan Devastator, I'll give a 7.5. I think this is actually somewhat likely to see play again, especially as like a one-of, even in like Big Red or certain mid-range decks and stuff like that. So I just think this is a neat little creature. I wouldn't play it unless I was planning on having a lot of mana at some point in the game, you know. So decks like say a green-red or teamer ramp deck. Again, I think that's an interesting spot for this, where you're playing Titan of Industry. Right, so in games where you're ramping, you don't draw your Titan of Industry, well, you have this, right? You can just play this as like a 6/6 flyer, get in with haste, that's cool. You still have like a ramp payoff in a card like this. It's a ramp deck. You're hoping to spend 7 mana in that game, so it's a cool ramp payoff. But if you're getting to your Titan of Industry, you need something to get on the battlefield and block so that you can actually make it to the turn where you play your Titan of Industry. Like, you can just throw this down as a blocker on like turn 3 or 4, right, if you got nothing else to play in that spot. So there's a lot of cool stuff about this in certain like decks that are going to go long anyway, so I like it. I like the COD. Next is Temporal Firestorm. One of the... It's not an interesting card. It's not as interesting as some of the cards we've talked about today, like Jaya or the Fireball, Flyerball, whatever. But Firestorm is neat. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 red for a sorcery with kicker, 1 and a white, and or 1 and a blue. Choose up to X creatures and or planeswalkers you control, where X is the number of times this spell was kicked. Those permanents phase out. Temporal Firestorm deals 5 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. Really cool for Super Friends. It is a super cool card for Super Friends decks. I imagine a lot of the time you're just going to pull the trigger on this on turn 5. As long as you can make it to turn 5, you'll pull the trigger on this on 5. And then when you draw the second one, that's the one you're more likely to kick, right? Because you play your Firestorm, sweep the board, knock everything out. Next turn, you play a Planeswalker, make a creature to block whatever they played on the turn after the sweeper, right? And then you play your second Firestorm, you phase out either your guy or you phase out your Planeswalker that you played a couple of turns, after the sweeper or whatever. So, like, I could, after you're rebuilding after the first one, that's when you play your Walker, and then the second time you play this, bam, you kick it. So, I think that this is probably going to see a lot of play, a good bit of play in Standard. I'm not sure that it's better than Burn Down the House in some decks. Like, for instance, right, Arcane Bombardment might be a real card after rotation. We lose some stuff. We lose... notably Vanishing Verse, but we also lose Binding the Old Gods and a couple of other kind of important main deck enchantment hate things. And it might take people a while to catch on that they need to play in stuff that kills enchantments other than Boseiju in their main decks, right? So, but there's going to be this time period where Vanishing Verse is gone, Binding is gone, a couple of other cards are gone, and things like Arcane Bombardment are probably really good, much more difficult to remove, right? So in a bombardment deck, you want to play Burn Down the House, right? You want to sweep the first time you play it, and then you want to maybe sweep the next 3 times you play it off a bombardment, but eventually you want to start being able to make 1/1 so you can actually win the game with bombardment. And this card doesn't do that. Just Burn Down the House is much better in those decks, but it could just play both, I guess, if it wanted to. I don't think it wants to, though. So there's going to be spots for some sweepers, spots for this sweeper, but the decks that feature this sweeper, I actually fear much more. The only thing I said that I'll have to say about this is that if you're in a Super Friends deck and you're playing Jeskai Friends, for instance, are you going to play this or are you going to play Depopulate? Are you going to play both? Maybe. I mean, that's actually totally feasible. You play both. But, if you are playing Jeskai, if you're playing Boros or something like that, you probably have better options for sweepers. But, hell, if you're playing Jeskai Friends, maybe you just play 4 Depopulate for this. Or it's like 2 Depopulate, 3 or 4 of this so that you can hit it twice, protect a Walker the second time like I was talking about. So, I do think that this is a very standard playable Magic card. Even at 7 mana to kick, because at 5 mana it's still very good. It's still very good at 5 mana, so... we've seen this card be playable since Midnight Hunter Crimson Vow, whenever Burn was printed. So we know that this effect is playable in Standard. I'm going to give this card a 7.75. I think this is probably the other more boring card of the day, along with the Mana Dork. It's not super interesting to talk about, but Well, we have talked about it a good long time now, but I'll still give it a 7.75. I think this card probably sees a good amount of play. Not quite as much as our green mana dork friend from earlier, but still, I think in the decks that this is in, you're going to get sick of it relatively quickly when you lose all your guys that get to keep their Emperor or their Teferi or whatever. So it's I'm more scared of getting sick of this card. I'm more scared of getting bodied by this card than I am excited about this card existing, but I have to acknowledge it's very good. I think it's quite a good Magic card. Oh, Evolve Sleeper. Yeah, this is the last standard legal card of the day. I didn't know we were going to get to it last, but this is an interesting card, but a card that I have to tell you, and I'm very sorry, I apologize. I don't really think it's that good. This is that blue creature. This is that blue creature. Oh my god. First person in chat, tell me. First person gets love. First person gets love. It's the blue Ascendant Spirit. I got it before anybody in chat. Even though chat is on a delay. Yeah, there. See, there goes chat. Ascendant Spirit, Ascendant Spirit. Yeah. Ascendant Spirit, but it's not blue anymore. So it's not as good in like tempo decks. Like, it's probably even worse than Ascendant Spirit. The second ability on Ascendant Spirit, is it not flying? The second ability on this is Death Touch, which is just worse. But still evolve. Let's talk about the card. Evolved Sleeper is a 1 black mana 1/1 human with black. Evolved Sleeper becomes a human cleric with base power and toughness 2/2. 1 and a black. If Evolved Sleeper is a cleric, put a Death Touch counter on it, and it becomes a Phyrexian human cleric with base power and toughness 3/3. Here's the good part. 1 and 2 black. If Evolved Sleeper is a Phyrexian, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then you draw a card and lose 1 life. So here's what they're trying to do with this. They're trying to make you think of Phyrexian Arena, right? Okay, that's what they're trying to do. A 3 mana card that you lose a life, you draw an extra card every turn. In case you don't know. So, but crossing that with like a level up guy, like not a level up, but like Ascendant Spirit type creature. The cool thing about this, just like Ascendant Spirit, is that you can use that third ability as many times as you want. You see. So the first time you use it, it'll become a 4/4 because it has base power and toughness 3/3, right? So it'll become a 4/4, you draw a card, you lose a life. Next time, 5/5, draw a card, lose a life. 6/6, draw a card, lose a life. 7/7, draw a card, lose a life. But you can't do that every single turn and still have mana to use the cards you've drawn. The cool thing about this, though, is that you can do it at instant speed. So your opponent has to be careful when they swing in. Your opponent has to be careful when you swing in with a fully evolved sleeper, with a Phyrexian sleeper. You can do it at the end of your opponent's turn. So if you have like 6 open mana and your opponent didn't give you anything to counter or remove, right? Then you can just pump 6 mana into this, draw 2, and make it like at least a 5/5. So that's not bad. Like, being able to use that third ability multiple times in a game is probably pretty sick for your initial 1 mana investment. You know, maybe your opponent doesn't remove this. They remove the 2-drop, the 3-drop, the 4-drop, the 5-drop, but they can't remove this. It's still going to end up killing them. It's still going to end up being a 6/6 that's drawn you 3 cards, replaced itself 3 or 4 times over the course of that game. That's all good, but it's in just incredibly mana intensive. To get it to that level, you didn't just pay 1 mana. Your initial investment was 1 mana, but you paid 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You paid 7 mana. Even if you're doing that over the course of 3 or 4 turns, you're still spending so much of your available mana. You're coming off of the curve to do this, and that was always the problem with Ascendant Spirit. The cool thing about Spirit is that you could put it in these more tempo-oriented blue-based decks so that you can get down Spirit turn 1. Hopefully you went first, because if you didn't, there's going to be a problem. But if you go first, you play Ascendant Spirit turn 1. You pray your opponent doesn't play a permanent on turn 1. And then you play a land on turn 2, and you just keep counterspell shields up for the rest of the game. Your opponent doesn't do anything on their turn. Well, that's when you level up, I guess, for, again, lack of a better term. Ascendant Spirit, you do it at the end of their turn, right? This you can play that way, but I don't think it's going to be quite as effective in that role as Ascendant Spirit was. And Ascendant Spirit saw very little play at the end of the day, so I just don't know. I will say this draws you more cards and more reliably than a card like Spirit. The third ability on it is cheaper than Ascendant Spirit. Just pumping 4 mana into it, gives you a 3/3 Death Touch, which sounds like a lot of mana, but again, it's cool you can do these things at instant speed. So if you have one on level 1, right, really level 2, it's a 2/2 Cleric, if you've already pumped 1 mana into it. Your opponent goes to swing in. Again, they have to be careful doing that because you can level it up at instant speed, block, trade with a guy much bigger than it. So Death Touch isn't a terrible ability. It's really not. Card might be better than I'm judging it as, but even with all the cool abilities and the ability to draw a million cards on your 1-drop and stuff like that, I still think it's just way too mana intensive at the end of the day. I'm not sure what decks it actually makes its way into. That's another thing, is that the card doesn't really have a home right now. It might at some point soon, but right now the card doesn't really have a home. And again, the first couple of modes are just kind of milquetoast, you know, just whatever. That's really that third mode, but to get there, you really have to devote tons of your mana to it, and you have less mana than you think, especially if you play this turn 1, you know, oh, well, you level it up turn 2. Well, now you only have 1 mana left on turn 2. What are you going to do? Akiva Reckoner raid? Maybe, right? Well, on turn 3, I guess I'll level this up. Well, I only have 1 mana left? Like, you still haven't actually done anything besides play this guy on turn 3, and then, you know, the way we play standard Magic nowadays, and we'll probably continue to play standard Magic after rotation, I just don't think that's good enough. I'm not sure. So maybe this is better than I think it is. Maybe just playing it on 1 when you're on the play, and then leveling it up on 2, playing, you know, a 1-drop or holding up a 1 mana removal spell or something. And then once you hit turn 3, you're really cooking, right? You can hold up that 3 mana removal spell like a Soul Shatter-esque type spell or something like that. And then if they don't do anything, EOT, level it up, or if they swing in with a small guy, level it up, trade, whatever. But even in that case, oh, imagine that though. You play this guy on turn 1, your opponent goes, doesn't do anything. Turn 2, you level this up. And then turn 3, right, your opponent's turn 2, they play a creature. They play a creature on their turn 2, right? And then on turn 3, they swing in. You haven't done anything. Your turn 3, you just held up to level this dude up. So your opponent swings in with their big 2 mana guy. You trade by leveling this up and giving a Death Touch. All right. Well, your opponent still has 3 open mana and you traded. I just feel like they're going to get the better of you in that situation because you've spent a total of 4 mana on 1 guy that you traded with a 2-drop. They've got all their open mana on turn 3. I just think a lot of the situations with this card don't look good for you when you really play them out in your head. So, I don't know. If you play it late in the game, it's a mana sink. You can immediately level it up. But again, you can say the same thing about Spirit, and it didn't see play. And I think it might ultimately be the better card. But again, man, Spirit allows you to get through for combat damage and get cards, whereas this just allows you to pump mana into it and get cards, which might be ridiculously sick. So I don't want to underrate this card. I'm going to give it a 6.75, but it could be a little better than that. But keep in mind, a 6.75 is like decent. It was not terrible, but you know, I still don't think it's quite as good as some of the other cards we've looked at today, although it is pretty exciting. And, you know, Phyrexians. We've already made that pretty clear that there's Phyrexia in this set.